I'm diving deep into the Cold War to explain the espionage, arms race, and global tension in just 10 minutes. Can I break it down without losing my mind? The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension that lasted from the late 1940s to the early 1990s, and it's one of the most significant events in modern history. It was a global phenomenon that shaped international relations, economies, and societies, and it's still influencing our world today. The primary challenges faced during the Cold War were ideological differences and the threat of nuclear war. The United States and the Soviet Union were the two superpowers, and their differing ideologies, the capitalist West versus the communist East, created a deep-seated rivalry that permeated every aspect of life. This rivalry led to a massive arms race, with both sides developing and stockpiling nuclear weapons, bombers, and missiles. The fear of mutually assured destruction hung over the world like a cloud, and it was a constant reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict. The threat of nuclear war was very real, and it led to a series of proxy wars, espionage, and covert operations. The CIA and the KGB were the primary intelligence agencies, and they engaged in a global game of cat and mouse, trying to outmaneuver and outspend each other. This led to some of the most infamous spy scandals and operations in history, including the Cambridge Five and the Bay of Pigs. As the Cold War intensified, the world became increasingly divided and the threat of nuclear war drew closer. The concept of mutually assured destruction became a stark reality, and it forced leaders on both sides to think carefully about the consequences of their actions. This led to a series of close calls, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The espionage and arms race were just two aspects of the Cold War, but they were critical components of the global tension that defined the era. The United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a series of high-stakes confrontations, from the Berlin blockade to the Korean War, and each side tried to outmaneuver the other in a series of proxy wars and covert operations. The Cuban Missile Crisis was perhaps the most critical moment of the Cold War, and it highlighted the dangers of the arms race and the threat of nuclear war. In 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev authorized the placement of nuclear-armed ballistic missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States. This led to a 13-day standoff, during which the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. The crisis was eventually resolved, but it led to a series of arms control agreements that reduced the threat of nuclear war. One of the most significant events of the Cold War was the fall of the Berlin Wall, which marked the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union's grip on Eastern Europe. In 1989, thousands of protesters gathered in Berlin demanding greater freedom and autonomy, and the East German government responded by opening the border. As the Berlin Wall came tumbling down, the Iron Curtain began to unravel, and the Cold War began to thaw. The fall of the Berlin Wall had far-reaching implications for global politics, and it marked the beginning of a new era of international relations. The Soviet Union's grip on Eastern Europe was broken, and the world began to move towards a more multipolar system. The United States emerged as the sole superpower, and it marked the beginning of a new era of American dominance. As we reflect on the Cold War, it's clear that espionage and the arms race played critical roles in shaping international relations. The threat of nuclear war forced leaders to think carefully about the consequences of their actions, and it led to a series of close calls and confrontations. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked the beginning of the end of the Cold War, and it paved the way for a new era of global politics. That's it for today's video on the Cold War. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed the ride. If you've got any thoughts on the Cold War, please leave them in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about nuclear weapons, check out my video on the nuclear arms race. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.